What's up, everybody? It's me, Salmondrw, collaborating with our homie at SalmonHouse, Erlan Rots. We're bringing a new project to you called Rot Drw,
where Salmondrw and Erlan Rots reviews at least 6 albums
that come out each month.
Tells you which one we loved, which ones we hated.
So you don't have to, and so you can get a few tips along the way on what you should be listening to. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to start off with one of the albums that I love that came out this month, September 2020. All right, now the first album that we're going to jump into is Gold Record by Bill Callahan. Bill Callahan is well known for his work with the band Smog, basically doing alternative rock in the 1990s. But since then, in say the last 10 to 15 years, he's really made a name for himself with his simple, plaintive ballads. They're often about very mundane subject matter. And with this one, Gold Record, he claims that instead of making an album that is more like a novel with sort of this longer thought out idea coming together, he's really compressed it down to these short songs. There's not a lot of content that's interrelated between them. They're more kind of just like themes that come to mind and how he experiences them. And I have to say that for me, I love Bill Callahan, and I do think that this is a good album. It's very simple, to the point. It's a sort of a clean 40 minutes of peaceful meditation and listening. But I will say that for me, as bold and lofty as that claim is, this idea that he's somehow making this switch in his style of recording, or that, it's not quite the same, I don't know that I totally buy that. I felt like this album didn't really seem that different to me than one like his previous one, Dream River or Apocalypse. Like, the songs still kind of sound very similar. I feel like, the Airplane song that I remember from the last 10 years that he did sounds very similar to me in a way to the Breakfast one here. Like, sometimes he'll pick a topic and then he'll kind of pontificate on it. And it's great. It's really, really good for what it is. Again, it's thoughtful, it's meditative, it's gentle, it's beautiful. I like it a lot. But, to me, this does definitely not represent a big leap forward in the sound of Bill Callahan. Rather, if you have never experienced what he has to offer before, I think you're going to like this. And conversely, if you're very familiar with him, I think you're probably going to find that you already know what you're in for in a lot of ways, but it's still pretty good. And there are a couple pleasant surprises, like Let's Move to the Country or Cowboy, that I would say, much like the cover of the album, have this kind of Southwest-inspired feel, and that is not something that permeates all of his previous albums, so that was sort of a pleasant diversion or an interesting direction that this album went. So I wouldn't call this a deep romantic love, but yeah, I loved what I heard. I definitely enjoyed it, and I think it's worth a listen. Things you might expect to hear on a Bill Callahan album. Again, very sparse instrumentation for the most part, especially because of his sort of deep wooden voice. Drifting alone, as it's just kind of got that almost like a crooner kind of thing going, but it's a lot of gentle piano, maybe gentle acoustic guitar as well. He doesn't clutter up the mix with a lot of instruments, but one of the nice things about it is if you can sort of get again into that simple, thoughtful headspace, then it's actually a very purifying album, and his storytelling and observation, as always, are primo.
My first album is Cult's Host. The New York duo, Madeline Fallon and guitarist Brian Oblivion, are back with Host, a 12-track album running for about 40 minutes. A band that is now a decade old has released an album lacking their usual darkness and takes a new wave style that is pleasant and dreamy. Shane Stoneback ensures the production is smooth and velvety with creative instrumentation such as horns on 8th Avenue, sweet synths scattered throughout the album, and some pitch percussion. The themes of reaching for freedom, using the idea of parasites and hosts in romantic relationships, is one that strikes hard, but it sounds sweet on the ears. My favorite tracks here are Trials, 8th Avenue, Like I Do, and Monolith. Pretty good album overall. Not a whole lot of weak links here, not a lot to hate. It's going on my love list.
Next, we have Dara Durian with Find the Sun. This is a very cool artist who has done music with Dirty Projectors, A.V. Tear slasher flicks. She's just basically a lady who's made music all over the place, and it seems like after being inspired by Meditation Retreat, she recorded this album, Find the Sun. And it's a really cool album. This is one that has a lot of different sounds going on it. And, you know, sometimes an album, it really perfects one sound and it does it in really interesting variations. This one, she's just sort of all over the place. You know, the first couple songs have this sort of krautrock feel to it. The Saturnine song, for instance, really kind of hitting home that just sort of chugging, almost like Kraftwerk, kind of that Kraftwerk sound of the like, you know, just sort of propulsive drums. But there are also songs like Monk's Robes, for instance, that are very, very different in nature. That is kind of poppy, almost like Baroque pop. And so you have so many different sounds on this, from psychedelic rock that sounds like The Doors to doom metal to these, you know, moments with like flutes and things like that, that again kind of have that dirty projectors, alternative indie pop sort of feel to them. So I really think that this is actually just a very, very cool record. I mean, this is an artist who has worked with really awesome people, but what I was very surprised to find here is that over the course of 50 minutes, over the course of 10 songs, she really packs in a lot, and really in such wide and diverse portions. Mask of Yesterday, which comes near the end of the album, actually has, again, that really lush, beautiful sound, and her voice is really, really malleable. Sometimes you'll hear Durian as this sort of in the back, you know, again, kind of metal. It's not like exactly hearing the lyrics that's the most important. And then other times her voice comes through so clearly, and it's really, really beautiful. Just like the last track, Sun, where you really can kind of hear some of those psychedelic, metal, intense emotions churning. It's a great contrast, and, you know, normally I'm not the sort of person who wants something different on every single song, but I actually think that if you're going to do that sort of thing for the wide variety of styles she has going on, she actually nails it. Durian and her new album, Find the Sun, I definitely loved it. It's all over the place, but it's tough to find something that really catches your attention in this modern moment, something you're like, wow, that's a fresh sound, or something I really want to hear because there's so much music. The Durian album does that for me.
My second album, which is really an EP, is William Tyler's New Vanitas. The Tennessee country guitarist has another release this year after Music from the First Cow. I'd highly recommend listening to New Vanitas when you're on a hike or you're just kind of walking through nature. The reflections of this year and our lives scattered throughout this album as subtle reminders are very nice. The use of ghostly self-recordings and sounds of everyday life throughout the ambient track list serve as a soundtrack to the day of the life of a modern age creative. My favorites here are Four Corners, She Swims in Hidden Water, and Pisces Backroads. It's a short release, so there's not a whole lot to hate here. Also going on my love list.
Moving on, Fleet Foxes, Shore. This is a huge deal. I'm a super fan of Fleet Foxes. I can't lie or deny my passion. Favorite band, favorite modern band for a long time. So Shore comes out, and obviously I'm interested. And, you know, I will say I think that it might be my least favorite Fleet Foxes album so far. I mean, I've only been able to listen to it a handful of times, but I will say maybe my least favorite album by them so far, and yet somehow, no surprise, I still love it. This is an album, it feels like a healing wind for this very difficult time in the country, for this very difficult time on the planet. It is very poppy. I think it has Fleet Foxes, who have always kind of had this stadium possibility, stadium presence, big band presence. It really finds them coming into that in a big way. So on songs like Can I Believe You, you have Robin Pecknold's voice going in directions, having a clearness and a brightness that is really pretty unique for their music. And that being said, as someone who really liked the more opaque way that the band started out on their first album, or even parts of their third, it didn't really do as much for me in some ways. Now, there are definitely songs that really touch that, scratch that itch that Fleet Foxes has left. A song like Featherweight, for instance, you know, Featherweight has the musical complexity of a song that, you know, might be on Helplessness Blues and is awesome for it, sounds really good for it. And there are moments like Cradling Mother, Cradling Woman that totally get me there. It's just a little bit of a balancing act on this album right now, where there are ones that are totally in the pocket, really diverse, really, have that musical complexity. And there are some other ones where I feel like, the pop influence, or just sort of even the brightness, how high Robin Pecknold's voice is, having other voices singing, it just didn't get me every time, or it feels a little more self-conscious in some way. And yet I say all that, and of course it's a great album. It sounds really, really good. And there are moments like the closing track Shore of such quiet contemplation and sort of mental illumination that it's hard not to say that this is an album that I love. If anything, this is an album that I love, and I feel like I'm going to love spending more time with it and getting to know it better. I'm Not My Season, another late track on the album that again just feels like a balm, just a healing wind, a calming wind, basically just trying to restore some sense of peace to the world and maybe to the band itself. It feels like a very group contribution as well. I think on an album like Helplessness Blues, Robin Pecknold's voice really kind of overtook everything. His songwriting overtook everything, and I was there for it. But this does definitely feel like a band effort, and one where the different contributions of the members, it's something you're going to have to really listen through and fully appreciate and enjoy. But this is a good album. This is a worthwhile album, and highly recommend giving it a listen.
My third project is Marilyn Manson's We Are Chaos. Marilyn Manson has returned with his 11th full-length release, We Are Chaos, produced by Shooter Jennings. Being the provocative and ghoulish character he is, with unique characteristics and abnormal stunts, this release sees him providing a lot of the same stuff, but he is switching it up a little bit. Jennings works with Manson to put this album together to sound a little bit more melodic and pleasing than his past releases. While I can agree with most fans that this is his best project in 20 years, I don't believe this is good. We're seeing a much softer side of Manson, which is notoriously weird and creepy for the early 2000s. And that aesthetic is kind of less effective now. His music is kind of dialed back on the typical alt metal, and is kind of just taking more of a pop rock approach at some points. Manson's groans and strange throat sounds are not pleasing to hear, especially in the opening track as it winds down. I don't really need to hear Manson's groan directly in my ear. And the sound pops, and there's just weird panning going on. I don't need any of that, it's just trash. The lyrics feel cheesy and spoopy, and there's some good melodic tracks here, but little development. They get repetitive and they just kind of start to annoy me. Manson is one of those spooky guys that occasionally has a good, creepy, or insightful thing to show, but I often just believe it's accidental or written by somebody else. To me, Manson will be something that pushed the envelope in the early 2000s and the late 90s, but ultimately piggyback his success off of other people's writing, shock factor, and just the weak aesthetic that holds popularity to Latin countries and emos who haven't quite developed better taste. I'm gonna have to say, Manson's just gonna have to go on my hate list. There wasn't really any track that actually stood out to me that I liked from this album.
The last album that I have to talk about as far as love goes is Sufjan Stevens' The Ascension. And once again, huge Sufjan Stevens album. I mean, between Fleet Foxes and Sufjan Stevens, you have two titans of the indie music world. So not surprising that these albums are well put together, complexly produced. They're fairly long albums as well. I mean, the Fleet Foxes album is an hour long. This one is an hour and 20 minutes, which I can't necessarily hold against it. I think Sufjan Stevens has always made really complex, diverse albums. And the closest one I can compare this in sound to is The Age of Odds, his album from about 10 years ago now, that had a lot of electronic elements and sort of took this artist who was known for folk melodies and this really soothing voice and kind of pushed that into a much more confessional space about his life and his sexuality, as well as using a lot more electronic instrumentation, or kind of being in that same space as, say, like Bon Iver eventually moved into, right? That space where it's like, it's indie rock, it's, got those kind of indie hipster themes, but again, it's got a lot more like digital drums and things of that nature. And this album kind of pops off in a lot of different directions, but that overall, the kind of continuation of that style, a sort of, you know, indie white man's 808s and heartbreak that just sort of, you know, is like confessional and deals with a lot of heavy depressive themes, which are common in his music. It is a really heavy album, honestly, and it in some ways is so bombastic that I feel like I haven't been able to fully digest what it's trying to do. But there are very, very good songs on this album. I mean, a song like Ativan, for instance, or even Video Games, which kind of plays with a Lana Del Rey song in terms of its delivery. These are really, really good songs that just capture your attention and kind of unfold the more you listen to them, while also having that kind of Kanye-esque factor of having instantly quotable lyrics that are going to make you remember the fact that you listened to it. I mean, when you have this guy talking about, you know, kind of taking, you know, antidepressants and, you know, having like bodily reactions like wetting the bed and stuff like that. I mean, it can be really graphic, which again, you know, a lot of his music has kind of touched on those darker places. But at the same time, it's very, very catchy, and it really has a lot to offer in terms of, you know, I think maybe some of the deeper, more plaintive emotions that speak to this particular moment in life. Tell Me You Love Me, that's another one of those great pop songs that exists on this album. And because of its size and length, you know, there's so much to it. There is a nice balance of definitely more tracks, and then also a couple ones that are just standouts, really catchy, will probably kind of make waves in the indie sphere. And then really much longer ones that are maybe more in tune with the 50 States Project albums that Sufjan Stevens did. So for instance, Sugar really pushes that Age of Odds electronic sound, where he's definitely using a lot of synthesizers, keyboards, and you know, sort of digital effects to highlight kind of the drama and the gravitas of the emotions that he's feeling. So this is an album, much like the Fleet Foxes one, that I think is going to take time to unpack. But early listens are very, very positive for this album. I would say there's definitely a lot of love going on here, and highly worth your time. Would recommend Sufjan Stevens' The Ascension.
My fourth album, JoJo's Nectar. The popular internet enigma Joji has finally released his third full-length release, if you count In Tongues Deluxe. It's his best project yet. He mixes much of his musical past styles and themes with much better production and features. If you're a fan of old lo-fi Joji, Pink Guy, the hopeless romantic Joji, or the newer, cleaner style of Joji that we see in the singles, you'll find something to like here. The first 3 tracks establish the mood very quickly. Ew features cleaner vocals, a better production on a ballad about a breakup that he's plagued with, yet is understanding of. It's similar to Run and Sanctuary in terms of how it is produced. Modus possibly establishes a Oliver Tree-esque dilemma in Joji's life where he's possibly referring to his label. It's followed by TikTok, a track that sounds as if it was initially recorded by Pink Guy and then redone to fit the Joji moniker. While that doesn't sound good, this is one of the better tracks on the album. It's Nectar's banger. The first half of the album shares all of its previously released singles, but the second half continues with lots of features, both good and bad. My favorite tracks are Give Me Love, Run, Sanctuary, Ill, TikTok, and Afterthought. The worst tracks are Daylight, Upgrade, Reanimator, and High Hopes. Not a big fan of the Diplo production on Daylight. It's just not my favorite Joji direction either. The vocals, though, are incredibly clean. Upgrade is just kind of plain, not too interesting, suffers from underproduction and underdevelopment, like a lot of tracks in the second half. If Joji had put the production work that was put into Run, Give Me Love, or Sanctuary onto the rest of this album, it would have sounded much better. Reanimator is a track that I want to like. I love the intro, but when Joji comes in and when Eve Tumor starts singing, it just kind of falls apart for me. I feel like the vocals really just kill it for me. High Hopes is the worst track in my opinion. I feel like it starts strong. I actually like the beat on this, but the singing just really doesn't go with it. And when Omar Apollo comes in, it just falls apart. I don't know. I mean, Omar Apollo's lyrics are honestly kind of whack and weird. Maybe I just haven't watched WWE for a while, but I just don't understand this line. Brand new whip, sound like Cheerio. Wake me up. Rey Mysterio? Why is Rey Mysterio waking you up? Overall, this is a good listen. The faults are not as distracting as they've been on previous Joji releases, and it really has Joji shine here. Makes me excited to see what's coming in the future for Joji. I think if it was worked on further and produced and developed a little bit more, it would have been a much better release, but this is still going on my love list.
All right, the man, the myth, the legend, maybe not quite as legendary as Erlan Rots over there, but Diplo releases multiple albums this year, but one of them that just came out is MMXX, or 2020 in Roman numerals. And Thomas Wesley Harding, the man himself, releases an ambient album, which is pretty interesting. We're definitely going to put this is going to go in the hate bin, the hate category, unfortunately. I mean, I named in one of our recent live streams, I named Diplo as a Sith Lord in music for me, which, I guess, Force Lightning, maybe this is the equivalent of his Force Lightning. But yeah, I mean, as an ambient album, I can't say that it does much for me. And frankly, look, when I listen to ambient music, I'm not listening to ambient music generally to be really judgmental of it. I'm listening to experience it, to think about it, to let it affect the setting that I'm in, or even sometimes as simply as just letting it be background music for me to do something. And this would definitely make good background music. I would say it does make good background music, but the songs themselves, it just feels like in a space where there's so much electronic music coming out today, and in a space where, ambient has gone over the last 40, 50 years into this very self-aware and somewhat easily reproducible space, you have to kind of do something interesting with it if you're going to keep people's attention. And again, that's kind of contrary to ambient music, right? Brian Eno famously, compared it to music for airports, right? It's not meant to be focused on. But really all I can say about this one is that the compositions themselves were kind of bland to me, and they ran together, but not in like an intentional, it's all one piece kind of way. I would also say there are a few standouts. I really like, they're all numbered in Roman numerals. I really liked 3. 3 was very cool. And, there's some of these that almost feel more like they're ambient, but they're not ambient in like a burial kind of truly to the ground, way. They are more like ambient interludes you might hear at an EDM festival. And look, that's not necessarily a bad thing to me. That's not like, EDM is not a dirty word in the context of this album, but I do feel like sometimes they kind of pick up or they're looking for these little ways to be interesting or be entertaining. And they sound like they would, be good interludes during a set, or, if people were really feeling something high energy and you wanted to bring them down, you could use these. But on their own, I don't really feel that they stand for very much, and they don't feel like they have a lot of staying power. So really all else I can say is I kind of liked 12 as well, and 12 has Rye singing on it, with Mike Maloche, which is very cool. And so, that's an instance where like I kind of like his vocals over it. But again, it's like, I don't know, these feel like demos, or they feel so forgettable in a way that, it's a very trendy thing. Mike Dean did the same thing, I think, earlier this year, where it's very trendy to put out an ambient or an IDM album. And hey, go for it, blow my mind. But in a lot of cases, these albums don't have a lot of shape or form to them. And so, you can put them on in a non-judgmental context and enjoy them, I guess. But if you're trying to think like, what about this is unique, or sort of what would keep my attention were this big star's name not on it, I don't really think there would be much for you here.
Next up is Deftones' Ohms. The dark classic metal band Deftones has released their 9th studio album, Ohms, that delivers a guitar-heavy, aggressive, abrasive, dark 45-minute listen. The album is not easy to digest, especially if you are not a Deftones or metal band fan. Ohms is exactly what you would expect from Deftones' classic sound. This being established by the opening track, Genesis. The songs blend into each other masterfully as to not lose your attention for a second. You go from a classic style like Genesis to a little bit more melodic Ceremony, and this just continues throughout the whole album. The style and lyrics are harsh, gripping, sexy, gothic, and hateful. The many references to Jesus and God having failed us, but more importantly, us having failed them, are just metal as fuck. The lyrics and vocals are truly the sauce of this dish. The harsh delivery of the guitars, while still sounding crystal clear, sets a tone and lets Chino Moreno deliver exactly what he wants you to feel. Hearing Deftones in this year sounding this good is refreshing. It feels so close to their older releases while still toppling over the music being released right now. My favorite tracks are Genesis, Ceremony, Pompeii, and This Link Is Dead. There aren't any weak tracks in my opinion, and I know I've said that a couple times, but this track list is refined to be consistent and strong. Definitely going to my love list.
All right, so we've come to the final hate album, and look, the albums in this hate collection they didn't piss me off. They didn't, make me want to smash my headphones or anything like that, but they just didn't capture my attention, or I couldn't pick up what they were putting down. And with the Diplo album, I could kind of, fake it, or I could kind of just go along with it because it's ambient music. I like electronic music. I like, ambient music's pretty inoffensive. But for me, this Sad 13 album, Haunted Painting, just from the front woman from a band called Speedy Ortiz, which is a name I feel like I've seen many times, but I've never listened to. And, apparently it's more in the indie rock zone. I don't really know. But this one, I don't know. I really liked, Sad 13 or Sadie, it's kind of like elite speak. I really liked the aesthetic of this album. The cover, which has a nice cool painting, is pretty interesting. I wanted to like this album, and I thought I was going to find something that I could get into. But I can't lie, I did not enjoy this album. I didn't really like, I think her name's Sadie Dupuis, maybe. I didn't like her voice very much, unfortunately. I definitely wanted to vibe with it more, but it kind of has this grunge aesthetic that didn't really do a lot for me. And, I know in listening to this, if I were to give this a repeat listen, I would get more out of the lyrics, I think, if I listened a little more closely, maybe, or if I looked them up online or wrote them down in a notebook or something. I think I might connect a little bit more with them. But the overall aesthetic of this album just really didn't do much for me. It was a little too, maybe a little too emo, or a little too, not necessarily even screamo, but just kind of it annoyed me in the way I guess a screamo album has the potential to annoy me. It was very strange. I think, grunge is probably the fairest aesthetic to compare it to. And yeah, just the grunge emo thing just didn't do anything for me here. And so I gave this one a try, and I felt like I tried to engage with it, or kind of pick up what it was putting down. And again, there were a lot of things around it that made me think I would like it, or that I wanted to like it. But ultimately, Haunted Painting, maybe it'll be good for some in this October season, but man, it was super forgettable for me, and frankly, just not a very pleasant listening experience. Take Care. That was the song that I was trying to think of. I wanted to say Take Care is an interesting song where there were sort of some other instruments coming into the mix, and her voice had a lot of range in this song. I felt like there was kind of, she was pushing her singing a little bit more. And so that was the one song that comes right near the end where I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool. This is kind of interesting. But it was like a flashing moment, this fleeting moment in this album where I was like, oh, I'm kind of intrigued. And then, yeah, it was just over. So ultimately, a bit of a bust for me on this one.
In my last album, Idol's Ultramono. The Gen Z's favorite punk rock band has taken a minimalistic approach to their newest album, Ultramono. And Ultramono, it delivers. They continue the usual punk style of heavy guitars, loud drums, shouts positivity, and crushing the fascists. But this time, the critics are included. For their last album, they were heavily criticized for their nothing to say lyrics and typical boring lines filled with catchphrase-esque wording. Idols responds with my personal favorite track, Mr. Motivator, and Lover, with lines like, how do you like them cliches? And I want to cater to the haters, eat shit. Like the album art depicts, Idol's lyrics are not subtle, and they take more of a direct scream-in-your-face approach, ensuring you understand their views, but also ensuring you get some positivity out of it. Ending the album with Donkey, featuring the late Daniel Johnston's True Love Will Find You in the End, it's exactly what somebody out there needs to hear. After wanting to rip the wealthy out of their chairs, they want to throw in some feel-good moments. The lyrics are very simple and kind of cartoony in a way to mock the previous critics with lines like Conor McGregor with a samurai sword on rollerblades and fuck you, I'm a lover. They're humorous and fun to listen to. There are lots of fun lyrics to hear a punk band like Idol shout out loud, like let's seize the day, all hold hands and chase the pricks away. You can do it. And more sentimental ones like I got anxiety. It's got the best of me. With these kind of lyrics, how do you not expect the young punks to love this band? A lot of the beauty in this album is the intent and the sentiment and some of the lyrics. That's not to say that the music is at all bad. The mono approach leaves everything simple and exposed, but the vocals, lyrics, drums, bass are all smashing throughout this album. The post-production is done by Kenny Beats. Did Kenny Beats do the production on this? Post-production done by Kenny Beats is punchy and smooth. My favorite tracks here are Mr. Motivator, War, Grounds, and Model Village. Ne Touche Pas Moi through Rains aren't my favorite tracks, only because they're very, very simple, saying a lot for Ultramono, but they're awesome songs nonetheless. Ne Touche Pas Moi being a supportive feminist track that somehow certain groups of people still can't fully understand, and Carcinogenic, that song makes me just want to say, that's carcinogenic as a phrase more often, honestly. It's probably their best catchphrase. Idols, Ultramono, also going on my love list. Lot to love this month.
All right, everyone, so that brings my portion to the end of the first Rot and Drw Love It or Hate It Music Challenge. And so now one of the things I get the pleasure of doing is I get to recommend an album to Erlan Rots that he will then report back. And so I am going to be kind this time, and I'm going to recommend the Dura album, Find the Sun. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I think it has some, of all the albums that I listen to, I think it has some of the harshest edges. I think it has, you know, it doesn't have maybe the overwhelming emotional gravitas of like the Sufjan Stevens album, or even some of the like frenetic musical moments of Fleet Foxes, but what it does have is a really interesting blend of like soft and pretty and like harsh and intense. And so that's something I feel like my buddy Erlan Rots can appreciate. I think if you listen to this album, Erlan, I think you'll dig it. So I want to do you a favor. I want to encourage you to listen to something that I think you will genuinely enjoy. And I would be really interested to hear what parts you respond to, because I'm willing to bet they might even be a little different than the ones that I responded to. So I'm going to challenge you to listen to Dara Durian's Find the Sun and report back and let me know what you think about it. I'm very excited to see what album that you choose for me. And yeah, we'll do it all again next month with a whole new crop of records.
And lastly, I'd like to recommend to you, Salmondrw, you listen to Cult's Host album and tell me what you think. It's one of my favorite indie bands. It's a great listen. I think you'll like it.
So yeah, just want to say a couple quick things. Obviously, we're talking about all this music here. Remember that we make these music playlists every week for you. So please check them out. Go on our Spotify, see what musical stuff we're cooking up. Look at our older music reviews. We're doing this new kind of short form thing, but keep in mind that we've been reviewing albums for a while. I've been reviewing albums for a long time. And so whether it's here, Eat Your Owner, there's lots of places that you can find me writing or talking about music. And so this is just one more great way to do it. Check out a lot of albums, and just kind of get a taste of everything that's going on right this moment in music. But also just want to say, feel free to check us out over on our social media, SalmonHouse World, coming at you with new content all the time. And what a pleasure to get to work with my buddy Erlan Rots and share some great news about great new music just for you.
Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on social media. Follow us on Twitch too. We do weekly live streams. Catch a pre-show at 9:45 p.m. EDT every Friday.
All right, signing off, Salmon fam. Catch you on the flip side.
And stick around for more salmon content. See you next month.